Ever been amazed by how certain trends or ideas just like explode? Not just inching forward, but really leaping ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today on the deep dive, we're looking at something kind of similar in the realm of uh, church planting movements.
Right. You can think of it like a rapid chain reaction,
Mm.
a multiplication, not just addition,
Like multiplication.
Yeah, of local churches starting new churches, and it spreads really quickly through a community or a people group.
Exactly. So we've been digging into what fuels these movements. And our goal today is really to unpack that definition.
Mm.
We want to understand the core engine sort of driving this kind of exponential growth and maybe just as importantly, clarify what makes it different from other things.
Yeah, the distinctions are key.
Right. So by the end of our time, you should have a much clearer picture of this significant phenomenon and, well, why it matters.
Okay.
So let's get right into it. What's the first thing that jumps out about this definition?
Well, I think the term rapid reproduction is really key. This isn't about a slow and steady kind of pace. We're talking about a dynamic where new churches almost immediately start their own new congregations.
Wow, almost immediately.
Yeah, and then those continue the cycle. So the rate of growth is often, well, faster than you might think possible.
Faster than you think possible.
Consistently outpacing general population growth. Because the aim is really to genuinely reach an entire people group. The insight here isn't just the speed, though. It's the self-sustaining nature the speed creates. It helps it outpace, attrition and other pressures.
Faster than you think possible that really grabs you. And then there's multiplication, not addition.
Yes.
This isn't just like one church here, another one there. The source material we've looked at shows that in these movements, pretty much every church is actively involved in starting multiple new churches.
Exactly. It's that exponential factor.
Yeah, like one becomes many, and those many become even more. It's not about a limited goal of planting just a few churches.
Right, not just checking a box.
No, the aim seems much broader, reaching whole cities, whole people groups, eventually maybe the world. It's a big shift in thinking from just adding slowly to like explosive expansion.
Absolutely. Each church sees its role not just as, a single church, but as a potential parent, really, to multiple new faith communities.
Okay.
And that leads to that compounding growth. Then there's the whole concept of being indigenous.
Right. What does that mean exactly in this context?
Well, it signifies that the movement is generated from within the local community. So while maybe there's some initial outside help.
Like missionaries or something?
Yeah, perhaps. But the real momentum quickly shifts to local believers taking ownership. And what's fascinating is that, sometimes individuals inside these movements might not even know foreigners were involved at the very start.
Really?
Yeah, it feels completely homegrown, like a natural outpouring of faith within their own culture. It's not just about local leaders. It's about culturally relevant expressions of faith that really resonate deeply.
Yeah.
And that makes the movement much more resilient,
That makes total sense. It's not something just dropped in from outside. It's actually growing within the community.
Exactly.
Okay, so the fourth element is churches planting churches. Our sources talk about this being a crucial tipping point.
Very crucial.
So individual planters might kick things off, but the movement really takes flight when those first churches become the main drivers of planting new churches themselves.
That's it, exactly. It becomes this cascading effect, One church leads to others, which lead to more, often going way beyond the direct control or influence of the original planters.
Interesting.
Some promising starts actually kind of plateaued because the initial leaders, maybe unconsciously, try to keep too tight a grip. But when the churches themselves really catch that vision of reproduction, that's when a true movement gets that unstoppable momentum, like a wildfire, right? Once it takes hold, it spreads naturally.
Good analogy. Okay, and finally, these movements tend to happen within people groups or interrelated population segments.
Yeah, which seems logical, right? The message spreads easier through shared language, shared culture.
Makes sense.
But the research also shows it usually doesn't stop there. New believers, naturally, they want to share this hope they found with people outside their immediate group, too.
Okay, so it starts within a group, but can spread beyond it.
Often does.
So we've kind of unpacked the definition there. Now, to really get a handle on what we're talking about, maybe we should look at what church planting movements are not.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's vital. Helps avoid some common mix-ups.
Okay, so first up.
First, they aren't just a revival or a spiritual awakening.
Oh, so?
Well, revivals typically happen among existing Christians, right? It's about revitalizing faith, rekindling fervor among people already converted.
Right, energizing the base, so to speak.
Exactly. Church planting movements, though, they're focused on reaching those who haven't yet embraced the faith. Often in communities considered unreached, dead in their sins, as the source material puts it. The target audience is fundamentally different.
That's a really key distinction. It's not about waking up the existing church. It's about establishing completely new communities of faith where there weren't any before.
Precisely.
And it's also not just mass evangelism, right? We've all heard about big crusades or events where lots of people make decisions. But the sources seem to suggest CPMs are different.
Yeah, they are. Mass evangelism can definitely be a spark, drawing large crowds. Right.
Sure.
But church planting movements go further. They focus on establishing ongoing communities, these new churches.
Okay, the structure.
Right. These churches provide the framework for continued discipleship, regular worship, sustained spiritual growth, and that then fuels the rapid multiplication of even more new churches. Not just those initial decisions. It's about building a whole spiritual ecosystem that lasts.
Got it. So building resilient communities, not just counting hands raised at an event. What about these things called people movements? Our sources mention them. Sounds like there could be overlap.
Yeah, there can be. People movements usually describe situations where large numbers of people, maybe across a whole region, respond to the gospel message. We see examples of that happening around the world.
Okay.
But what sometimes differentiates them from a true church planting movement is, well, sometimes there's a concerning lack of new multiplying churches being formed to actually absorb and disciple all those new believers.
So lots of converts, but nowhere for them to really grow.
Exactly. One source called it potentially a miraculous flash in the pan if those new converts don't get connected into local reproducing churches.
Miraculous flash in the pan. Yeah, that's a powerful phrase. So a big turning to faith can be part of a CPM, but the key is that those new believers are integrated into rapidly reproducing church communities.
That's the defining characteristic. Without that church planting engine, the impact might just fade away.
Okay.
And then we absolutely need to differentiate CPMs from the church growth movement. That was pretty big in the late 20th century.
Right, I've heard of that. What are the key differences there?
Well, there are several. One is about the size and structure of churches. The church growth movement often kind of equated bigger with better.
The rise of the megachurch.
Yeah, that was often seen as a really positive trend. In contrast, church planting movements often find that smaller, more relational house churches are particularly effective for rapid multiplication.
Interesting. So smaller can actually be more strategic for growth in this model.
Generally, yeah. Especially for building deep community and making it easier to launch new churches quickly.
Okay.
What else? Another difference is the focus of outreach. The church growth movement often emphasized targeting harvest fields or responsive fields.
Places where people seemed open already.
Right. Areas where it looked like you'd get quick results. But our sources show that church planting movements frequently begin among groups that might initially look, well, less responsive, maybe even resistant.
Wow, that's a real contrast. Not just going for the low-hanging fruit then.
Not necessarily, no. And a third difference from the church growth movement involves the role of outsiders, like missionaries.
How so?
Well, the church growth thinking often advocated pouring significant outside resources, money, personnel into those receptive harvest fields to maximize the immediate return.
Makes a certain kind of sense.
It does, but in church planting movements, while outside help might be valuable initially, the long-term goal is always for local believers to quickly take the reins.
Ownership again.
Exactly. They become the primary leaders and multipliers within their own communities. The emphasis shifts fast from external dependence to internal capacity.
So it's about empowering local leaders quickly, not long-term outside support. That definitely ties back to that Indigenous point.
It does.
Now, the research we looked at also stresses that CPMs are not just a divine miracle. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, that's important. While everyone involved in these movements would absolutely point to God's extraordinary work,
Of course.
attributing it solely to a miracle can be an oversimplification. It risks ignoring the crucial role of, well, human agency and responsibility.
Our part in it.
Right. Our sources highlight that even well-intentioned actions, if they're poorly aligned with, say, biblical principles or the context, can actually slow down or even stop these movements. So while the impact feels miraculous, it's also influenced by people's choices and actions. It's more like a partnership, you could say.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's not passive. There's intentionality needed, alignment, And it's definitely crucial to understand they are not a Western invention. That feels really important to underline.
Absolutely vital, yeah, especially given the history of missions. Our research included stories from church leaders in places like North Africa
Right.
who were, frankly, a bit wary of just adopting the latest church planting fads from the West.
Understandable.
Their experience showed that these movements are truly a global thing, something God is doing across all sorts of cultures and contexts. Yes, they happen in the West, but they definitely didn't start there and aren't limited to any one cultural package.
A global tapestry, really. Diverse settings. Okay, and finally, the sources remind us that a church planting movement is not an end in itself.
Exactly. It serves a bigger purpose.
Which is?
Well, sometimes the sheer energy and dynamism of the movement itself can become the main focus, right? You get excited about the numbers, the spread.
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal always is drawing people into a saving relationship with God and seeing his glory increase. The movement is a powerful means to that end, but the relationship with God, his glory, that's the destination.
Right. Keep the main thing the main thing. So zooming out then, why is understanding all this about church planting movements so important for you listening?
Well, I think there are several really compelling reasons. First, these movements give us a clear window into how God is powerfully at work in the world today.
Okay.
If we genuinely want to align ourselves with his purposes, we kind of need to recognize and understand where he seems to be moving most effectively.
Partner with God's mission, like the sources say.
Yeah, exactly. Not just pursuing our own agendas, however good they seem. We need to pay attention to how he's using CPMs to reach whole people groups.
That idea of aligning with God's methods, not just our own bright ideas, that really resonates. It's like, don't try to push the river, right? Work with the current.
Precisely. Sometimes if they're not in harmony with how God is working, understanding these movements helps us become, hopefully, more effective partners and avoid, hindering what he's doing, like that kicking against the goads idea.
Right. And secondly,
and very practically, these movements are just showing remarkable effectiveness in reaching people who are far from faith.
and the sources make a pretty bold claim here, don't they? Calling them something like the most effective means for drawing lost millions into saving disciple-building relationships.
It is a bold claim, yeah. But it seems to be based on the observable results.
Okay.
That combination of rapid spread and the focus on establishing local, self-sustaining churches, it creates a really powerful engine for evangelism and discipleship on a massive scale.
Effective. And the final reason.
Finally, and maybe this is the most profound one, church planting movements contribute to that ultimate goal of multiplying the glory of God.
Ah, connecting back to the big picture.
Yeah.
Our sources mentioned Habakkuk's prophecy, the knowledge of God's glory filling the earth.
Exactly that. These movements help make that happen in a really tangible way. As new communities of faith pop up and grow, they start reflecting God's character and love within their own cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a ripple effect, person to person, community to community, leading to faith flourishing and God's glory spreading.
So let's try and bring it all together then. We've explored church planting movements as this rapid multiplication of indigenous churches planting churches, usually within a people group.
Yep, that's the core definition.
We've broken down each piece of that and, importantly, clarified what they are not.
Right. Distinguishing them from revival, mass evangelism, people movements, the church growth movement.
Purely miracles, Western inventions, or ends in themselves.
Exactly. And we've highlighted why they matter, because they show God at work, they call us to align with him, they're incredibly effective, and they multiply his glory.
Okay, so as you, the listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider that broader principle, multiplication versus addition. Think about it in any area of growth or change you see around you.
Interesting thought.
Yeah. What assumptions might you hold about how transformation really happens? And how might these principles we talked about, indigenous growth, rapid multiplication, how might they challenge those assumptions?
That's a great takeaway question.
This exploration today, it's really just scratching the surface. There's a huge amount of real-world examples, ongoing research, lots more to dig into.
Absolutely. It's a vast and dynamic field.
It really is. It's a powerful phenomenon to consider just the potential and the impact of understanding how these movements of rapid, locally driven multiplication can actually happen.